introduce Mr. Vinayak Godse, Chief Executive Officer of Data Security Council of India. As we all know, a leading industry organization founded by NASSCOM. He comes with a rich experience in various domains, to mention a few: telecom infrastructure, information security, and IT transformation, and decade of around 2.5 plus decades of experience. He has been part of DSCI from its foundation and has been managing the technical team and major events during his 14 years stint with DSCI. He also oversees the National Center of Excellence for Cyber Security Technology and Entrepreneurship, a joint project of Data Security Council of India and the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. I would now request Mr. Vinayak to come and deliver the keynote on the topic Global Data Protection Regime, Areas of Convergence and Divergence. Mr. Vinayak, floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rameshji. Thank you, Naki, and entire team here for inviting me for this an important conference on data protection. And you all know that as an industry body focused on security and privacy, since we set up in 2008, we have been continuously pursuing this project from various different dimensions. One is certainly policy, law making perspective, other which are coming in privacy. Other is helping industry verticals or industry sectors and companies to prepare themselves for the privacy program implementation, creating credential program to create the capabilities and skills in cybersecurity in privacy field. And even nowadays, because privacy is such an interesting subject which has so many use cases, it throws to for new innovation research and new capability building. Basically, so we also look at this area, which also providing quite a good new possibilities of creating commercial value to technology and services in this area. So we try to look at that part as well. And while doing that, we also see the privacy is such an important area in the globalized economy, where especially a country like India, which has immensely benefited because of the integration with the global economy since 90s basically. So we believe this is an area which has larger global ramification as well. Whatever you do in terms of the your result here has to do with what would happen globally in terms of where these opportunities are creating in the space of digitization. If you see, India is definitely the powerhouse in terms of providing both technology, business, and services to the global geographies, almost 85 plus geographies that we have been providing, and especially in the area like financial processing. In some areas, it is being said that only those few of the work which require you to have direct engagement with the customer, most of the operations are happening out of India, basically. Right? And now with IoT coming in, cloud computing coming in, we see a lot of interesting different lines of services which are emerging for us to create a commercial value creation, and more importantly, creating job possibilities for the engineers and for the graduates in different streams, basically in the country. With IoT coming in, I had seen even street lights of the bigger global cities can be managed out of India. In fact, there's one big country, the street light is being managed out of one of our city here in India, basically. We may see how we doing factory management out of India. We may probably be doing managing the farms, agricultural farms out of India. So a lot of those possibilities being thrown by IoT, cloud computing, and all of those possibilities, and that will create a very interesting new set of lines of service, and we'll be probably creating a lot of those possibilities for various different kind of new graduates coming in from very different streams, basically. So for that to happen, the data access is important, access to systems are important, and for that to happen, the entire while we see the globalization, we see this possibility. I talked about how things are evolving at a global platform. Uh, we see there are definitely some areas they are converging in terms of the way the regimes are being spelled, right? For example, Data Protection Directive of 1995 had brought that particular concept of recognizing a particular geography is adequate enough to called as adequate nation from the data privacy perspective, right? So now GDPR has taken that to the next level. So because of some of those kind of regulatory intervention and regulatory expectation, basically what we are seeing is entire globe is now trying to harmonize, trying to come up with some kind of a privacy regime, but at different level, basically, right? What are those areas? Basically, so one is recognition of privacy as an important area. Is definitely there. Privacy as an area for regulation, definitely there all across the globe. There must be try to maintain a list of the countries which have been legislating for privacy. The list goes more than now 120 plus countries doing this kind of coming up with some kind of legislation for the privacy. And after GDPR, many countries are coming up with very strong data protection regime across the globe. And largely, in some geographies, there are two contesting views basically, and I'll also talk about how these two contesting views are becoming from the data perspective as well. So one is certainly the privacy as a fundamental right. So that's the direction some geography, especially Europe, because of the history that they had in the World War II. So privacy as a fundamental right of a citizen of the Europe is a one way of probably taking the privacy to the level. Basically, once it is a fundamental right for a citizen, then entire enforcement mechanism changes to take care of to protect the right of the individual, basically. Whereas US has more market-driven approach for the privacy, it's more consumer rights, not like fundamental right of the individual, but it's a consumer right of the individual. Basically. So these are two distinct things, and that is also to certain extent changing in US as well. So once you divide privacy as a fundamental right, then you're trying to think about privacy as a national legislation which provides assurance to the resident and citizen with respect to some content principles of privacy. And these content principles of privacy are increasingly, we call them as a subject matters of privacy. They are increasingly becoming very specific, very granular, very nuanced, and very detail oriented as well. So expectations of privacy, as we have seen, especially GDPR has triggered that, had been going now increasingly very specific, granular, nuance, and more importantly, they will ask you probably, for example, if you just look at any legislation piece that you pick up, the GDPR on one hand, other hand, even draft data protection bill of a country like India, if you just pick that up, you'll see that there were definitely some content principle like notice, consent, subject access requirement. So they are there in earlier privacy regime. But in each of that principle that has been talked about, there are certain set of lines which have been written to talk about how that principle needs to be deployed, basically. So this nuanced level of implementation of privacy is one of the ways. And once you take privacy as a fundamental right, you try them to make sure that the content principles are written in such a way that there are nuanced level of implementation happens. That's one evaluations that we have been seeing. In US, basically, CCPA is also going in that direction. And in privacy legislation ecosystem perspective, this is one of the important things that we have been seeing, and we are also picking up from the perspective of data protection regulation that we have. So subject matters of the privacy is becoming more nuanced. That we see, and we see all across. Privacy as the one legislation is definitely trained. Europe is trying to converge privacy. One is the content principle, and more important, the enforcement mechanism at the European Commission level. And somehow one of the feedback we always, because we have been engaged in a lot of this tier 1, tier 2 diplomacy, which happens with this data transfer between EU and India. So one of the key important asks from our side since 2007 that we engaged with the European Commission was there are too many of these compliances that we need to take care of. We are operating in European geography. So the GDPR converged that basically. right? You all know that now you can get a one country as your primary country for the compliance, and you converge entire your compliance with that basically. So this convergence is definitely happening at a block level basically. Convergence is definitely happening in terms of the what kind of specifics and granularities and nuances that you are talking in terms of the content principles of privacy. We also see the conversions happening in terms of way the enforcements are uh, being uh, devised. Right? For example, data protection authority across the globe that we see now, data protection authority at the central, at a regional level, has been now recognized as a key instrument for the enforcement basically. And then there are a lot of instruments that they talk about, right? From asking or devising different rules under that, empowering the regulation authority with some kind of power, their ability to make the rules on a specific area, even for that matter, their power to provide kind of a civil penalty, so they can now issue the or probably impose a significant civil penalties on the organization to certain area like India, which we probably is diverging from the global parties. As a privacy legislation, GDPR also doesn't talk about criminal penalty, but in our case, basically, apart from all other civil penalties that we talk about, we have talked about criminal penalties as a part of the privacy breach of the expectation, basically. So there are these areas like a divergence area, basically, at a nuance level in terms of the way the privacy enforcement is happening. Across globe that we see as well that privacy, because one is you have to protect the right. On the other hand, you have this content principle, your enforcement mechanism, and so all that is at one side of table. But other side of table, if you look at the millions of the organization are collecting information in millions of different ways, collecting and processing basically at a very different level. There may be large organization, mid level organization, small organization. It will be very difficult to enforce uh, privacy by a centralized authority in each of the instances that the data has been collected and been processed basically. And that's why in GDPR, and I also see that happening in PDP, at least the draft bill which has been published, where there is an ecosystem of an enforcement mechanism has been suggested basically. So one of the mechanism is self-regulatory organization, or probably notifying and approving the course of practices, or even for that matter, you creating certification testing and kind of assurance mechanism for the privacy. So these kind of mechanisms that we see across the globe, like these different instrument of enforcement of privacy is also coming as a key important area that most of organizations and most of the countries are converging basically. Way privacy. So one of the key distinction I talk about when you talk about privacy as a fundamental right, then you try to assume the lot of responsibility as a regulator. Basically, the government assumes significant responsibility of enforcing that as a their own responsibility and their own kind of and that's why you create a significant strong regulatory authority for that. So, but on the other hand, privacy is a consumer right, and the consumer right can be very segment specific as well. If you check US and the geography basically, so the approach there is not a one law to implement privacy or enforce privacy all across the industry vertical or all across the size of the organization basically. So in US basically we see a little bit divergent that is there from since beginning, that they try to see the problem solution driven approach basically. In Europe, or maybe it will happen in India as well. One law which will take care of a lot of the scenarios that require this content principle as the enforcement of privacy. But in US, until now, it was like you have problem, you have solution for that problem. For that matter, if somebody is subscribing the video from a library, so there's specific legislation for protecting privacy of individual who are subscribing the video basically, right? And such a 500 plus 550 plus small legislative pieces which talk about the privacy which talks about the privacy in US, and that map is very complex, but largely the approach there is a problem solution driven approach, and most of the area that we find that in US geography, but now there's definitely some call for converging entire the privacy making process in US basically. In US, every state has a data protection authority, especially from the context of the reporting of the privacy breaches basically, almost 48 of them basically. If the breach happened in one state and you are spread across all of the state and it is happening all of the state, you have to report to the local government, where in case of Europe or in case it could be very central level of a breach requirement will happen basically. Where you define this right to be this new Asia rights, basically the right subject access right in terms of the right to be forgotten, right of portability and all these things. Also changes in different geography basically. So Europe has very stringent view in terms of the way the SAR is to be implemented, and that may not be true in other geographic ways basically. So this divergence needs to be understood, and I have to really understand the privacy, and I have to really make the comparison and create a very good mental map about the privacy related ecosystem. So there are 7-8 areas that needs to be thought about basically. One large three level of categorization that we should be three level of privacy should be understanding. One is the content and what level of content that it talks about and what level it goes. Other is the enforcement mechanism. Is how the countries are taking their own kind of views basically. For that matter, when I talk about privacy legislation and I try to analyze them. So one is the content, other is the enforcement, and third important part is countries' view for the some areas. For example, location of data. So in some countries, location of data is very specific to the country's requirement basically. Some countries, the definition of the personal information, whether it is you call it as a PII or SPI or critical personal information, the country specific context have been used to define the type of the information basically. What kind of processing you want to subject it to. So when, from where, when, what kind of application that you will be enforcing it, whether you will be allowing anonymization or not anonymized data as a part of the project. So these are areas where we see a lot of divergence in terms of the way the countries are looking for creating the data protection regime, and most of the time it will a lot of those domestic developments shapes this kind of policy basically. In country like India, where we are also talking about non-personal data as an important area which can be pushed from privacy legislation perspective as well. So the concept behind the non-personal data is largely economic in nature basically, and we want to make the entire ecosystem more open, more participatory, more democratized, and we want to say that the data that is being collected can be shared for creating value, and value can be created a larger public good, value can be created by startup to work on basically. So these are more economic concepts basically, but the economic concepts are pushed as a privacy expectation in geography like India basically, and sometimes that may be required, but we need to think from perspective whether it is really privacy discussion or an economic discussion basically. And that's why there was discussion, and probably will be taking, I'm not sure about the direction, probably will be taking non-personal data as a separate discussion and probably privacy as a separate discussion. And in some areas and some countries maybe bringing that both of them together. For example, in case of Europe, they have GDPR, but they also have PSD2. PSD2 is like a data sharing obligation mandate, but they put that as a separate legislative idea than merging that to GDPR requirement basically. So some of these divergence needs to be understood, and way the localization I talked about, some of the discussion which also about whether you can put financial information as a sensitive personal information or not, health information or sensitive personal information or not. So those categorizing that particular set of information and where exactly you put them into which block basically is also the area of divergence that we see in terms of where the privacy is being implemented. The instrument that are suggested, the way you want to enforce, for example, extraterritorial extraterritorial kind of a enforcement of a privacy expectation. So Europe has this data adequacy requirement as a way to do that. In some countries, it may not be coming to that level because Europe has evolved in that basically. So how exactly you will make it happen is an important part. How the these kind of legislative actions shape the some of the new technology adoption, like a cloud I talked about, IoT I talked about. It will be very interesting to see. In our case, we want gone to the extent of what will this lead to in terms of security at hardware level, So all of these interactions and developments needs to be studied and needs to be mapped very well in terms of seeing different ideas that are coming as a part of privacy regime and seeing how these ideas are getting to shape and what are the different contexts behind that basically. So that is how I would like to put it in terms of a mental map as a privacy professional. We all are here. Should be creating in terms of understanding the issue process, and probably from that we can understand how exactly it's converging and diverging, and from that we can also see how things would be emerging from now to the coming future, and all that will be tested against some of those evolution that we see, the blockchain coming in, the Web3 coming in, where things are getting more distributed in nature. So some of the definition like data control, data processor may get challenged because of this. So that will also be very interesting area to see how different countries are taking different ways and different ideas to enforce this one basically. So this I like to conclude, and probably if you have some question, we can take it if there's some time available for this.
Ramesh sir, do we have any questions in the chat box? Ramesh sir?
I was sorry, I was talking in. I was checking it parallel at the back end.
Yeah, you're audible, Ramesh sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think there is one question has come.
Yeah, so it talks about it is under the DSL approach, the old format of data privacy bill, what was the application.
Right.
So I'm not sure whether we had opposed a bill. We were part of this data protection, the justification committee which was set up, and in that particular, there are 2-3 things, and you can see that as a, if you just see that justification committee report, you would see that in that report there's a dissent note of DSCI. So it largely talked about data localization, and now we also heard from government and minister why we need to revisit the concept of data localization in the context of, as I talk about, the possibility that we see, we will be, apart from IT business services, we'll be offering a lot of interesting services to the global geography. Our own product companies are going global, and that time we talked about why we rationally we probably are not in line with the thinking about localization as a way to instrument to enforce privacy. That's the area of contention. Probably we put that as one of the important point of note that we put as a part of the commission report. Second part is the putting the particular information as a sensitive personal information, right? So these are 2 areas basically. We thought that area we wanted to bring that to the notice of government and entire community, where probably we would not be in line with the thinking of overall committee that time basically. Yeah, so this any guidance is relating tool. So they're quite interesting tools. In fact, the volume and complexity of the implementation of privacy is so significant. With human intervention, you can't really do that really. So that's why the privacy preserving technology or privacy enhancing technology or privacy engineering is coming as a trend. There are a lot of startup in this area which can help you doing that basically. How do you reduce the burden on compliance by using automated way of managing things? So there are a lot of discussion happening. You can have a look at as a national CV, we have almost 7-8 startups in privacy in the country, and they're helping various different organizations for this basically. So I think technology is a way to implement many aspects of privacy, and it could also bring down cost quite significantly lower. there are various different technology are in open source as well. So, so many small scale organizations can use those technology to really improve their privacy posture.
I think there are no more questions, I think, Sanyogita.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vinayak sir, for all the insight and the knowledge that you have shared today with all of us. And thank you for coming, joining us and gracing this particular occasion. Thank you very much for your time and